that being said, we can't conduct business as a board, but we still want to do the crime review presentations and update to the police department, so we're gonna get that ball rolling. Hopefully, we have a fifth member walk in and say today, but until that happens, it's more gonna be an informational session, community discussion. Is that okay with everyone? Unfortunately, that shows, so I hope it's, all right, so I guess with the first, do you want to, Jerry, do you want to speak real quick? Chief, do you
Sure,
want to speak?
absolutely. You want me behind you or in front of you?
Whatever you,
Okay, I'll project, so I can just, whatever, catch you, okay. Good afternoon, good evening, actually. Thanks, everybody, for being here. Again, I want to apologize. I actually have a 6:20 meeting back downtown, so I'm gonna make this presentation. If there are any questions after I leave that I don't answer because of the time, Captain Gary Kudak, who's one of the commanders in our district, in our department, will be able to answer the questions. So what I wanted to do was to explain to you the consent to search. I know it's been a conversation for probably a couple of years. We now have a policy. It's in effect. Actually, a copy of the policy is up here, but there are copies. I'm not going to be speaking from that. I'm going to give you an executive version of what that means to you, and also what I'm sharing the officers, what I'm telling the officers as it relates to their responsibility to address consent to search with the citizens. So that's what I want to kind of share with you. But there should be enough copies in the back of this policy. This is the actual policy that the officers have and that they're required to go by. And there's also a form that they have to fill out. That should be in the back also. If there's not a back, if there are not enough copies, I believe you can go on CPAC's website and actually review it. And I actually have a couple extra copies that I'll leave here also when I leave. They'll become available. So I don't want to talk from this policy. You all can read this for yourself and get some time. But what I want to share with you, I have met with every officer in the department, just so you know. And we talked about this policy. And what I shared with them was what I told them, what I'm going to share with the community. There will be several meetings in the community as it relates to this policy and how it impacts the residents and how it impacts the officers. So the whole purpose hopefully was to do a better job of building trust between the police and the community, because technically we're all one. Even so sometimes there's this demarcation, but the police should be part of the community, and this is your police department. It's not just the Asheville Police Department. This department belongs to all of us. And I see myself as the chief of the community. I have, obviously, in this case, 300 employees that work for the police department, that work for the community, but I see my responsibility is not only to serve the men and women in this department, because I need them to serve you, but my responsibility is to serve you, and I should be a voice for the community as well. I just want to make sure that everyone understands philosophically where I stand as it relates to what I see my responsibility as the chief. And obviously, I'm the interim chief, so I'm not going to be here probably much past the first of the year, but rest assured, the manager has been very determined to make sure that you get a permanent chief that represents the department well and represents the community as well also. And I will have the pleasure of be sitting on that process and making recommendations to her and having a conversation with who that permanent chief is also. So I think it's important that you realize that. So this policy that the officer gets, and we talked about it, actually the last couple of days we talked about it. What I'm sharing with you is the officers do not have, but it's really just an executive version of that. And I told you what I thought that the reason for us creating the policy. So when I go out to the community like this, the first thing I'm going to say is, you all might wonder, what is consent? Exactly what is that? Because a lot of times officers will ask you, I want your consent to search something, and you might agree or disagree, but not having a full understanding of what consent is. So consent searches are lawful, but they warrantless searches that may be made by law enforcement officers that have permission, as it relates to this policy, to search a premise or to search a car. So if an officer is going to search a premise or a car, and the officer does not have probable cause, the officer has to get consent from whoever has authority over that car how does a person provide consent? Person can provide consent by verbal agreement. You can tell the officer, yes, you have permission to search the car or the building or whatever it is they're asking to search. A verbal agreement must be recorded. So if there's an officer, like you see officers that are on the street that are patrolling, if they ask you for permission, they will have a body cam. Okay, and that will record your response. They will also ask you for written permission, if you're willing to do that. And if you give them written permission, there's a form to send it back, and they'll have to indicate on there that you also gave them written permission. If you do not give them written permission, but you give them verbal permission, they'll have to indicate that you gave them verbal permission, but you didn't want to give them written permission. And all that is indicated on the form, that form that you'll see in the back. I don't know, do you have that form? Yeah, why don't you just bring the form up also? Does a person have the right to refuse to consent? And if you refuse, what happens? Yes, you absolutely have the right to refuse consent. Without consent, the officers can't search what they're trying to search because they don't have probable cause. Okay, so you have the right to refuse. Now, here's something that you really need to understand. If you refuse and the officer has not developed probable cause, the officer has to stop the search. Now, if you originally say yes, you can consent, and then you stop and say, hey, I want you to stop. I'm withdrawing my permission. That officer, if that officer has not developed probable cause from the point when you say he or she can do it to the point where you say stop, the officer has to stop. Okay? So you can give partial consent, and then you can say, hey, no, stop. However, this is very important. If you give consent and you decide stop, but by then the officer has developed probable cause, the officer does not have to stop. All right? Very, very important that you understand that. So, what is probable cause? Critically important. Probable cause is reasonable grounds to suspect that a person has committed a crime, is committing a crime, or is going to commit a crime. So if an officer has probable cause, an officer does not need consent. Okay? If an officer has probable cause, an officer does not need consent and won't be asking you for consent. That is extremely, extremely, extremely important. So, in a nutshell, that is what consent to search is. You can refuse it. If the officer doesn't have probable cause, he's not going to ask you anyway. So if they ask you, you can say no. And when you say no, the officer will not search. You get granted, and the officer's going to be, everything's going to be recorded, by the way, this whole conversation. If you grant it, it'll be on the recorder. And if you say, I gave you permission, but I'm stopping, I want you to stop, the officer will have to stop unless the officer has developed probable cause after you gave that officer permission to do that. Okay? And then I want you to, and what's critically important is you need to know what probable cause is. So if they have probable cause, they believe that a crime has committed, or is being committed, or is about to be committed. And they do not need permission under that set of circumstances. Now, we're going to have these meetings in several other locations with Christina. Christina's in the back, and she's actually working with the mayor's office, with the manager's office, to determine the locations where we're going to have these meetings. But I can assure you, most of the meetings will be in communities that are mostly impacted by this and really have a lot of challenges as it relates to the relationship with us, because we want to make sure they understand what we're doing and why we're doing it. Before I leave, any questions? I do have a couple of minutes to answer any questions. Any questions? Yes,
I
ma'am.
don't have a question. I have a statement. Thank you, Chief, and please thank the manager. I know you have a meeting, but I wanted to say that to you. I really, really do.
Appreciate that. Yes, ma'am.
Can refusal to consent, again, absent probable cause, in itself be a factor in developing probable cause?
No.
Clarity around that.
Great question.
Really
Right. Consent is consent. Right. So, in other words, if we do with us developing, or not developing probable cause. If we're going into it not having a probable cause. Now, you give us consent and change your mind, and we develop probable cause, we started searching, and you say, oh no, there's some evidence now. And you say, oh no, stop. No, we're not gonna stop now, because now we develop probable cause because we discovered some elements or some fruits of the crime. Okay? Yes, sir.
If an officer would like to search someone's property, why don't they just claim probable cause in the first place?
Because you
And
have
not
to,
bother with the consent?
if they have probable cause, they're not gonna have consent.
But why, what stops them from moving the bar and just saying, claiming probable cause?
The violation of
And
law.
doing away with this idea?
No, they can't do that. That's a violation of
But
law.
what prevents that?
Probably losing their job, the Fourth Amendment.
You have mechanisms to enforce that?
Oh, absolutely.
So you're saying that the camera will be rolling from the beginning of, say, a traffic stop, not just from the beginning of the conversation on consent?
From the very beginning, that's correct. Absolutely.
So then but they could still claim probable cause and not have to ask for consent. That is a possibility.
No, if they have probable cause, they're not gonna ask for consent. But they
No, I
can't.
know,
Right.
that's what I'm saying, they
Right.
could claim probable cause because they wish to search.
Yeah, but be mindful, if that happens and you feel that that's not appropriate, all you have to do is file a complaint. When you file a complaint, the first thing the supervisor's gonna do is we're gonna review the camera. We're gonna review the circumstances that led for that officer to take that particular action. And obviously, there are implications behind violating policies unless there are just
You see
circumstances.
my point,
taken
right?
on.
The reason for
Right.
this new policy is because of the abuse of the searching, correct? To certain communities.
Well, the reason for the policy is a coordination of a lot of things, but I'm sure
Yes,
in the
that's
eyes
what
of
I'm
some,
saying.
that's one of the reasons for the
So
policy.
if you have a police officer who has this habit of wanting to search people and claiming probable cause,
That
you see
person
what I'm
should-
saying?
I see what you're saying, but this
how are you
is.
gonna work to prevent that problem from continuing?
Okay, so listen to what I'm saying. That person should no longer be a police officer. Okay, it's that simple, because they're violating, now they're violating.
That's
the law.
your word.
Yeah, that's my word, that's the law, and there will be consequences for that kind of action. Absolutely. Okay,
Thank you.
all right, yes, sir.
I have two questions. My first question is, you said that probable cause could be thinking that somebody has already committed a crime. Does that apply to the individual who the police officer thinks is a suspect in a crime, thinks he looks like somebody who committed the crime, but may not be that individual?
No, remember what I told you, probable cause is a set of facts that has led an officer to believe that a person has committed a crime, is about to commit a crime, or is committing a crime. So, if I stop you and you fit the description of somebody that committed a crime, for the sake of this conversation, the officer should stop you and have a conversation and ask you questions, and see if those questions can help that person develop enough information to determine if in fact you committed that crime or is about to commit that crime. Probable cause is under the Fourth Amendment. And actually, when you get your policy, exactly what the Fourth Amendment states is actually in that policy that those officers have. It'll tell you exactly what probable cause is, and it will tell you that it's under what amendment, it's under the Fourth Amendment. Now, again, when, officers, like everybody else, if they violate policies, there are consequences as it relates to that. And depending on the degree in which their actions were, that will determine the degree of discipline or whatever appropriate action that we need to take. I'm not gonna sit here and I need to correct myself. If an officer makes a mistake, or if an officer doesn't make a mistake and he does something, and it's a mistake of the heart versus a mistake of the mind, obviously that's handled a different way. But if an officer's out there repeatedly doing, as you suggested, violating the Fourth Amendment, there are some serious repercussions as it relates to that. Did I say another? Yeah, I'm sorry. What's your second question?
What's the issue around this law not pertaining to individuals and not just property and premises?
Well, this, and again, that is a great question. And I think where we wanna kind of start off as it relates to the search, the consent to search, we wanna start off with premises, tangible things, buildings and cars. And I would not be surprised if someday it will parlay as it relates to searches. But there are already procedures in place and laws in place as it relates to what an officer can do in conversation with the individual. An officer just can't come up to you and search you. An officer has to have some reasonable suspicion that they're doing that. It has to either be for their safety, they can pat you down, given the circumstances for their safety, or if they're searching you, it's beyond patting down. They're at the point now where they probably develop probable cause that could very well lead to your arrest. But an officer should not be walking up to you and say, hey, I want to search you. They can't do that without some articulable facts to give them reason to believe that they can do that.
I understand what you're saying, not seeing it done firsthand.
Well, you know what, I am back up to dispute with you, but what I will tell you, when you see these things done, you gotta bring them to our attention. You absolutely have to bring them to our attention. And when you bring them to our attention, this is what our responsibilities should be. We should investigate it, and we should get back with you to give you the results of our investigation. Yes, sir.
And so, is there any additional training programs or procedures that are being put in place to go along with this?
Training programs for
For actual APD itself, because as someone said already, it seems like there are ways to circumvent this on your part. And I have a second question, which is, what are the efforts you all are doing on your part to actually get more engagement for the communities that are most affected by this in your actual meetings, i.e. like this?
Right. So let me answer the last question first. As I had stated earlier, we're going to have several meetings throughout the community. And most of those communities are going to be communities that have been impacted by consent to search. So that's what we're going to do. And Christina, just raise your hand, Christina. She's working with the manager's office to determine the best locations to do those meetings. That's going to happen. And I'm going to personally attend all of those meetings. As it relates to training, actually, officers are, to be honest, they're very well trained on what they can do and what they can't do. They're trained on this policy, but even though they're already trained on this policy, we have spent the last couple of days speaking to every officer in our police department to say, hey, we want to make sure you understand this, and if you have some questions as relates to this, you need to ask. And again, given the importance of this, I personally attended all those meetings as it relates to this policy with our officers. Yes, sir.
Isn't the point of the written consent to make sure that the people the police are interacting with are properly informed of their rights and also don't feel pressured to give consent? And so if you're saying now that police can get verbal consent, and then when someone refuses to sign written consent, it's still okay because you got it on camera? Like, how does that address people being pressured or misled about their rights?
Because the first thing the officers are going to tell you is you do not have to give me permission to conduct this consent.
So is that official verbiage? Is there like something officially?
It's there, and I just explained that to you. That is
What
part of
the
that
police
policy.
have to tell people?
Yeah, and the policy should be on the back if you just want it for your own edification. It's not, I'll leave some extra copies by there. Yeah. The very first thing an officer has to tell you, if they want consent, they have to say, I'm seeking consent, but you do not have to give me permission. And then they have to dictate that. Not only is it on a camera, but there's a form, this form right here, it will dictate the fact that you gave them written consent, verbal consent, or whatever, and it'll be dictated on that. And
So what's the point in allowing them to continue if they refuse written consent?
because some people don't want to, some people simply do not want to give written consent. I mean, that's the reality of it. But they're okay to give, and I'm not saying that happens a lot, but they're okay giving verbal consent. And as long as we capture that, so when we capture it, that means we're capturing the conversation, the tone of the conversation, who gave it, why they gave it, if there's an explanation, or why they refused if there's an explanation. So all of that's being captured, and it's all being reviewed.
Is that policy in line with, like, if I get pulled over for a traffic citation, when I'm issued a ticket, I have to sign and acknowledge that I've received it? Am I allowed to deny signing that form and give verbal consent in front of a camera to the police officer in that situation as well?
Well, yeah, you can refuse recuse it, but I don't know how that's gonna help you out any, but sure, you can recuse yourself, ticket. But again, all of that is captured.
Pretty sure it's not the same.
Why isn't it the same?
Well, one reason is you have all the oversight internally
Well,
on video.
okay, so now I think you're suggesting that you're questioning the video?
Questioning the access is very limited.
Well, pardon? Yeah, I mean, we can't break the state law. I mean, so, I mean, if that's a concern, I mean, you have other recourse to how to address that. But we can't, just like we can't violate your laws, we can't violate the state laws. Anything else? Because I don't have to hit the road. Gary, go ahead.
One thing with videos, if you're involved in the video, you can make a complaint to our professional standards, and you can come in and say, well, it doesn't allow you to do this video.
Right. We're not going to let you take it with you, but you can actually come, thanks Gary, for reminding me of that. And that's kind of a book to you. You can actually come in and review the video for yourself. So you can hear the conversation that you had and the conversation that the officers had. Yes, ma'am.
In the case of searching an individual, is the officer supposed to turn his camera on to him?
Absolutely.
We have a lot of safeguards built into our camera system with an automatic event where the camera will be triggered by certain actions the officer does. So even if the officer does not intend to cut it on, there are certain things that will automatically trigger that camera, like the blue lights on the vehicle, pulling the taser out of the holster and turning it on, things like that, automatically turn on the camera system. It's a repetitive process.
One more question, then I need to hit the road. Yes, ma'am.
How does this all apply to people who don't speak English?
It's actually in several different languages. I forget
The form is available in Spanish and Ukrainian right now, and then if we encounter somebody who speaks a language other than Spanish or Ukrainian, we have language assistance lines that we can utilize in order to get their consent and explain the form.
Again, hey, thank you. Again, there will be other meetings forthcoming in various parts of the community. We're going to publicize those. And again, for those that are really kind of questioning this whole thing with the body cam, I understand that. But as the captain has stated, if you or somebody you know that's been involved in one of those scenarios and you're not comfortable with it, call us, and whoever was involved, we will make arrangements for them to actually come and review it for themselves. Again, thanks a lot. And if you have further questions, Gary, Captain Gudak will be more than happy to address them. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks a lot.
We do have a quick number here. So I'll call the work session. These are 6 of 3. Have you gentlemen changed your minutes? We're going to look into them. We go to Lieutenant Howard on the update on the meeting. Please listen to that. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Good evening. I'm Lieutenant Coward. I'm new to West District of Asheville, about 4 or 5 weeks in. I want to talk a little about the community liaison program. It's part of the community's larger community policing initiative to put officers, a lot of us are command level, into organized neighborhood established groups as liaisons who go between, so that when issues come up in those neighborhoods, there's a direct line. We're at the meetings regularly, that can take concerns back to the districts, to patrol officers, to investigators, to try to jump on those issues as quickly as possible, bring results back to the next meeting to report on. So if you have an organized group that you'd like to reach out to see if we can provide a liaison for, please do. We really encourage organization. I'm sorry. We encourage organization. It really helps with communication with the police department. I'm assigned to Burton Street. Captain Jackie Stepp is assigned to the West Asheville Business Association, and Lieutenant Joe Sorrells is assigned to the East West Asheville Neighborhood Association. So if you're part of any of those, we are your liaisons in West Asheville.
How can we get the NAACP to be
I'm one of two, my name's Douglas, I'm one of two crime analysts employed by the Asheville Police Department. And again, I'm just gonna go through each of the regions represented by CPAC and talk about the criminal activity in each one of those regions briefly. So beginning in West Asheville, with the maps on the left, violent crime is most heavily concentrated around Vista View, Beaver View, and along Hayes Road, along Patton Avenue. Property crime has been most heavily concentrated around Louisiana Ave and Patton Avenue intersection, and around this location, around Trinity, along Haywood Road. For Louisiana, we had 2 burglaries, 2 larcenies, and 3 vehicles targeted along with 7 incidents of shoplifting. And around Trinity and along the Haywood Road district, mostly larcenies with a few vehicles targeted in the southern portion of Louisiana and around I-240. And then there's 3 residential burglaries extending north into the Burton Street community. Looking at the table, there were 5 fewer, crimes, this in October than there was in the prior month. But when we compare it to the same time period last year, we see a 27% increase. For our recent increase, we continue to see motor vehicle burglaries rise with 15 more than last month. We've had 22 more than last year. Can't emphasize enough that the vast majority of burglaries target unsecured vehicles. We'll be distributing lock-it-up packet materials and conducting proactive policing in highly targeted areas. But we encourage you to please reach out to your neighbors and remind them to lock up their vehicles, especially as we see a temperature drop. People will leave their vehicles unattended in the morning to warm up, and many of these burglaries become motor vehicle thefts at this time of year. The areas most affected have been residential areas immediately adjacent to Haywood Road, particularly from Louisiana to Beverly Road. And we've also seen a series of motor vehicle B&Es west of the Smoky Forest Highway, which is unusual. We've seen a slight increase in simple assault, commercial burglary, and theft. The picture changes when we compare to last year. There were 25 more thefts than last year. There were 15 more simple assaults, but there were 6 fewer commercial burglaries. The thefts have been concentrated within a half a mile of this location. There were 11 larcenies, nearly a quarter of all the larcenies committed in West Asheville occurred within half a mile of this location. And the simple assaults, most of them occurred within or around Pisgah View Apartments and Beaver View Apartments. 17 of 39 assaults, or 44%, occurred within these 2 regions, and over half of those, 11 of the 17, were domestic related. We've seen improvements in fraud, shoplifting, and motor vehicle theft when compared to last month and last year. And a vast amount of our proactive policing efforts, which include foot patrols, checking businesses, residential areas, and crime prevention, have occurred along Haywood Road, Pisgah View, Beaver View, Bird Street Community, and Patton Avenue down Smoky Park Highway. But down into a deeper drill down into West Asheville, where we're at currently, that red dot is Trinity, and the map shows both violent and property crime for the region we consider Adam 4, which extends from Patton Avenue south and east of Delaware Avenue to the river. This area, this beat, is particularly the most criminally active area of the 4 beats located in the Adam district. The density map shows the violent and property. As you can see, the highest concentrations of crime occur around Vista View Apartments, along Haywood Road, and along Patton Avenue near the New Leicester Highway intersection. So that is mostly shoplifting and an occasional assault. When looking at these 3 time periods, Adam 4 makes up approximately 35 to 45% of Adam District's crime each month. As the table shows, there are 13 fewer crimes in October than in the preceding month, but there has been a 49% increase in crime when compared to last year. And when comparing year to year, the most significant increases have been in theft, 14 more than last year, assaults 12 more, and motor vehicle B&Es 10 more. And all of those locations I pointed out on the previous slide where they're concentrated. For North Asheville, violent crime has been mostly concentrated in Hillcrest, where there have been 4 assaults, 3 of which were domestic. There was another assault just north of the location of a homeless camp. The property crime occurs mostly within the southern portion of the 5 Points neighborhood, and it extends up Merriman Ave. In the south, the top of this little cluster, the target of crime is mostly vehicles, and as it shifts north, it shifts into theft and commercial burglary the further you move up Merriman. Crime counts running consistently low in the north, 69 last month and 68 this month. In the case of as is in the case in the west, there has been a rise in motor vehicle B&Es, again, many of which B&Es occurs around Hummingbird Park off Starnes Avenue and extends east and north up Maryland, so basically in that cluster. Sadly, we've also seen a rise in sexual assaults and sex offenses, however, none appear to be connected or clustered in any way. There have been an improvement in the number of simple assaults, which were 8 fewer than last month and 6 fewer than last year. We've seen fewer residential burglaries due in part to proactive policing efforts in the 5 Points and Montfort communities. But in spite of this reduction, we still highly encourage residents to secure their doors and windows while away and be cautious of leaving packages unattended for long periods of time. Package thefts increase significantly during the holiday season, and the north is typically a heavily targeted region. For Central Asheville, as is typical, most of the violent property crime occurred downtown. For violent crime activity occurred mostly around Ashland Avenue. The property crime extends from Pritchard Park to Woodford Street. Improvement in Central Asheville across the board is seen across the board with 8 fewer crimes than last month and 7 fewer than last year. This improvement is a result of fewer robberies, burglaries, and theft. However, we have seen an increase in assaults, both simple and aggravated. Combined, there were 12 more assaults than last month and 10 more than last year. The highest concentration of assaults occurred downtown between South Finch Broad Avenue and Ashland Avenue. As the violent crime map shows, there's a lot of violent activity along Ashland Ave from the hotspot to the bus station. In all, there was 1 aggravated assault, 7 simple assaults, and 1 rape in this area. This area also had a cluster of property crime, 2 commercial burglaries, 2 motor vehicle B&Es, and a larceny. We're focused on mitigating the property crime in this area along with the activity that we've seen around Bartlett Arms and Erskine, both of which have seen an increase in residential burglary and larceny. We also saw 9 more fraud cases this month, but in total is on par with what we saw in 2018. For East Asheville, violent crime has been clustered along North Tunnel Road, around the mall, and around Spruce Hills Apartments. The Tunnel Road and mall activities linked to a series of robberies, which I'll discuss further in a moment. In Spruce Hills, there was 3 simple assaults, 2 of which were domestic, and 1 aggravated assault which involved the discharge of firearms. As is typical for East Asheville, most of the property crime is concentrated around the mall. The East is holding consistent with about 170 crimes in each of the 3 periods, but it doesn't mean that there hasn't been increases. We've seen declines in sex offenses, assaults, burglary, and fraud. We've seen increases in robbery, theft, and crimes targeting vehicles. There has been a substantial increase in vehicular crime, which in October there were 11 more than the month prior and 14 more than the preceding year. The highest concentration of vehicles targeted has been along the North Tunnel Road, where there were 8, and then behind the VA Hospital, where there were 4. We've also seen an unusual amount of activity around Azalea Road, and we've identified that area for additional patrols. Theft and shoplifting have seen slight increases, but overall relatively consistent. As one might expect, theft and shoplifting is heavily concentrated around the walls. And as for robbery, in October, there were 9 robberies in the east, all of which occurred in Baker 2, mostly along Tunnel Road. 3 were committed on October 12th by the same individual who was subsequently arrested. Another robber was detained on the 28th. The remainder remain under investigation. Though these incidents do not appear random in nature and do not pose an ongoing threat to public safety. And as for South Asheville, most of South's violent and property crime has occurred in a region APD refers to as Baker 4, which extends from Ridge Parkway to Biltmore Park. While most of the city has experienced an overall decline in crime, the South has seen an increase. There have been 18 more crimes in October than the prior month and 35 more than last year, 59% of which has occurred in Baker 4. The greatest contributing crime type to the overall increase, again, is motor vehicle B&Es. There were 7 more than last month and 20 more than last year. Vehicles have been most vulnerable around Montreat College, south of Mills Gap Road, and east of Biltmore Park. Theft and fraud are contributing factors with a combined 15 more than last year. However, when compared, the totals are more to last month. When compared to last year, the totals are more consistent. And the same can be said for simple assaults, which had 7 more than last year, but last month, but the same amount as 2018. So, if there are any questions, if you have any follow-up, I can discuss it that afternoon.
I want to ask a question. So, you were able to pinpoint that we're here at Trinity on the crime review. So when you say in or around Pittsburgh, deal with you, that doesn't specifically mean in high crime rate is in Pittsfield, Beaverview, but you say in or around, I think it, comes across better when we say what's going on there and what's going on around. Because if you put around inside those numbers, then we look at the same thing happening with Walker Heights. We start looking at that as being a danger, and we look at the crime rate there because it's so high within or around. Then we start making a plan to shut those communities down. So understand when we present this type of information, I think we need to be specific about what's in and what's around.
I can be more specific.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate it. Thank you, sir. All right. I don't believe Councilman Young is here. Councilman Young? I don't believe he's here, so I'm going to skip the transportation section. We already talked about 100% and cheap ones. Task force, I think that's been on the back burner as well. Again, it's been talked about. So the CPAC strategic planning retreat, and that kind of falls into the CPAC annual report as well. So every year we have to do a report to city council. So I just want to put on your guys' horizon about that, and I'll talk more about that in business. But the planning retreat, I thought Gary was really, really good about it. It's kind of us meeting, it is going to be another meeting, but for us to kind of discuss that, and so we can all kind of inclusively work on the annual report. If that makes sense. Do you guys have any questions for me or anything like that? So at the meeting, so the report is due, I believe, on January 4th. So I want to try to shoot for meetings early January. So let's keep that on the horizon. Okay? Thank you about that. So that's good. And then are there any concerns, complaints, accommodations? I don't, Jared, did you get any on that, any things as far as you got this?
No, we've gotten some recommendations and things like that.
Okay.
More, this was just to provide information that's in the back for people, so they know how to, raise a concern, file a complaint, or, command an
I
officer.
think that's one of the handouts, is that correct?
Yep.
Okay,
And
so
then
everyone,
the other one back.
yeah, the third handout, complaints and accommodations, so if you have complaints, or accommodations, you can reach out to me in each of the directions. So the paperwork's in the back, if you can pick that up, okay? Thank you. And so the big one here is, I've been in talks with HRCA. I think they're a fantastic organization. And we've been in talks with working together. So we're talking to you guys a little about that. We have a lot of the same overlapping responsibilities, especially in regards to public safety, community policing. So we've been in talks preliminarily to work together. That's what we want to do. Again, I think it's a good way to kind of coordinate our resources. I think HRC, I think they have more resources than we do. I think they actually have a budget. And there's a lot of things they have on their plate, especially in regards to community policing. I think we can do a good job of handling that or focusing on that for HRC and working together in that regard. I have been in talks, again, I met with the HRCA chair, the city attorney, about 3 weeks ago, I believe. And we discussed working on what's called a memorandum of understanding. To have something in play that's a document that we file with the city attorney look it over. And I want all of us to work on that together, but that's gonna be kind of a baseline for how we work together in the future. So even when we're off this board, this will be in place to create kind of history, if you will, but how our groups work together in the future, for that purpose. Do you have a question? I think question there is, okay.
As long as it's okay with the village.
Yeah, you guys clear with that? That kind of, for me, answer your question? Sure, so you have a question?
Yeah, just, can you just clarify what is HRCA? Who
Sure,
is
it's the
that?
Human Relation Commission of Asheville.
Okay.
And they're pretty much, their main goal is to help with pretty much equity and inclusion. That's one of their goals. And pretty much in all aspects of action. Yes, do you want to explain more?
Hi, my name is Dolores Grunwald. I'm the vice chair of the HRC.
I would rather her explain.
The focus of our board is to create a bridge of equity and inclusion throughout communities in the city of Asheville. Our retreat is November the 16th. Our employees all come because it is public record.
November 16th.
So November we just really wanna, look forward to bridging this gap of communication, so, yeah, the 16th, we're really great that y'all would come out and talk to us and see the board and meet, your board as well.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Would this make CPAC essentially a subcommittee of the Human Relations Commission in the way of its function?
We're still working. on it.
We
So
haven't-
that's what the member,
yeah.
Raymond Over is saying it's gonna be about, it's exactly how we're gonna function. So it's gonna create that baseline for how we're gonna work in the future together. So that's gonna be one of the issues we discuss. in what we do. It's a good question, thank you. Does anyone else have any questions about that? I know it's kind of it's a big change, so. Y'all good? Do you guys have any questions? Anything? I will do the vote. So you guys comfortable voting on this? Can I get a motion to vote for the RCA? Can I get a second? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. So we all vote on working with HRCA. So now, with that vote, thank you all. We need a vote to also create a task force as well. Kind of being a liaison task force. I think HRCA, is that correct? You guys have a task force as well?
We do not have a task force, but we do have a working group subcommittee,
Okay.
so that's how we operate within our parameters.
I got you. Okay, so,
But we'd be more than open to the, the leaders in our whole board for the
totally
conversation.
understand.
So if you all would like, we might be working with our agenda on the 21st.
Okay, does that make sense? We kind of are coordinating on that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, so gentlemen, I think we're gonna hold off on the vote for the work committee. I plan on being at the meeting as well, the 21st.
Okay.
I'll try, I do want to make sure that this is as well.
Okay.
So I think more coordination is better on that. But we did vote to work with y'all, very excited about that. Thank y'all. Thanks very much. We're very excited. So thank you. So we've got that settled. So the annual report, again, that's, I will send, I think there's a rubric that we'll send out, I might have Julie send it out to everyone. It's like a template of what we have to bring to present to the city council. So I'll send that to you probably this week, so you guys can take a look at it. And then we can have more discussion on what we have our retreat. Again, it'll be open meeting as well. Everyone will be welcome. So we kind of work on that report together. I want everyone's input on it. Does that make sense? Do you guys have any questions for me on that? All right, do you want to go to community, let's go to community regional concerns. I'll just start with Michael. Do you have any concerns? Robert? Rick? I'm good on my end, and Jerry.
I think the main concern that was brought to my attention from the Central District was the shooting that occurred outside Scandal's nightclub, and that there's no police there or any discussion of that as a potential hate crime or any potential hate groups in our community. And I think that puts a lot of queer folks in our community in a bit of fear, because there's some real concern there, so we just wanted to name that.
Thank you, Jerry, appreciate that. Okay, we're gonna move on to public comment. This is your chance to pretty much talk to us. So first of all, we're not gonna be able to really respond to y'all. We're gonna take that, everything you say into consideration. And Jerry will be timing, so it's a pretty strict 4-minute time limit, okay? I think Julie's gonna get the list of the signups. And when you speak, to speak up as well to the microphone, we appreciate that.
Carol?
I'm good, thank you.
Matilda, let's. So Matilda here?
Until the
There is none, so just.
You said there's no.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I apologize.
I just wanted to speak to some of the city meeting and more and more violence, because, you know, you have folks who are doing everything they can to avoid police detection, and then instead of just breaking somebody's arm, they might kill them. So it's really important to be able to consider how things work. And what we have around here is a group of very compassionate individuals doing wonderful work, but they can't do it alone. You know, it's a way of looking at how to help folks. But you have some folks doing really compassionate work, and you have other folks that are not on the same page and don't see those people in the same humane light, and then all that work kind of gets thrown out. So, you know, and then of course there's a lot of accusations thrown for a SETI collective, and they do life-saving work for only 2.5 hours per week in this area. So, you know, this seems to make a lot of sense to look beyond the increasing police narrative and increasing surveillance narrative. Thanks.
Okay, does anyone else want to make a public comment?
Lori Brown. So I'm here to pass out just a quick rundown of what's been lost in the last year in Asheville in terms of services for folks. There's a lot of talk about a need for policing, but we've seen foot patrols go up 400% in West Asheville. The policing budget was increased by $600,000 last year. But what's going down is services for folks who are using drugs and folks who are experiencing mental health crisis. And so I just want y'all to have those stats as we have these conversations, to know that part of the reason that you're seeing more folks having mental health crisis in public or using drugs in public is because our services are disappearing in Buncombe County. So I just want y'all to have those numbers and start to earn enough copies. Pass those around. Thank you.
Thank you. Would anyone else like to speak? Yes, sir.
I'll try to be very brief. My name is Steve Williams. As I said to the chief, I wanted to thank you for it, and also the city manager, city council, for written consent. Asheville's only the second city in North Carolina to adopt and deploy its policies, which protects the Fourth Amendment, and most of our officers know that through procedural justice. The point of it all is that it's used to save lives. I was most disturbed when Jerry Jolly and Chief Williams was killed. And so we were looking for a way to act proactively rather than reactively, as we often do. One of the individuals who came to me since we worked on Family Hospital, subsequently with the city of Buncombe County, was Ruth Christie, who's the leader of one of the voters and the NAACP. Her idea, as we always, and I'm a demographer, was to use data, and to use that data on traffic stops, which is the only archived and compiled data that is mandated by the state of North Carolina to bring meaningful change. Now, when we talk about meaningful change, we're talking about saving lives. So the old idea is to stop so many stops, procedure of kissing enough frogs, and then you'll have prints from the failed war on drugs, which has led to an inordinate amount of black people who've been stopped, searched, and a lot of folks killed and hurt, including officers. So we found that one of the things that we want to do is we want to save lives, save injuries. And as the chief said, this is our police force too. It's just not us versus them. In a democracy, this is a police force, and it all belongs to us. I can go into a diatribe about a lot of things, but one of the things when we talk about controlling the narrative, that African proverb that says, until lions have their historians, tales of the hunt shall always glorify the hunter. We want to talk about how we came into just knowing that we had to take this initiative to save black lives. The first thing that I knew was necessary was data. You can ask Eric Jackson, who's the chief data architect of the city of Asheville. Before we came and posed questions about the data, there was nothing there, not even an open data pool. And we also had to pull together the necessary people to make it happen. One of those being Ian Nance, who's on some sort of sabbatical right now and doesn't want to talk right now, who's a lawyer with the Southern Coalition for But, Ian is a nationally renowned expert in open search, data on police departments. And so we kept on until we got Ian up here. He is the curator of the, portal that the state has set up and that makes sense to folks. And we're gonna talk about pivot tables with APD, and I'll get you data analysts, because I really want a more, logical way to access that data. The other thing is that Asheville has the worst social determinants of health for African Americans in the entire state of North Carolina. And we have a data study right now on that. I also wanted to use data to depersonalize and to prove to both elected and appointed officials that pursuing these same policies of racial profiling was not sustainable. And the council, after a lot of determination, determined that we were right. Deborah Campbell came to Asheville. That was another thing that I had not banked on. I didn't see her today, but I believe Deborah Campbell from my conversations with her. She is a calculated strategist who is risk averse and data savvy. And it doesn't hurt that some of her first words to me when I asked her certain pointed questions about written consent and the indication and the deployment of it, her final words to me was, "I will leave here with my integrity intact." That meant everything to me. So I just want to thank all of y'all and just wish everybody well in what we have come to do. And I also want to say that for our community, we need to be able to control our own narratives. Please respect that. Nobody could lead the initiative better than us who are suffering predominantly from it. We're happy to take it to the next stage, even with pedestrian stops and searches. One of the things that we probably are going to do is do well now